Okay. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our Women of MENA in Tech virtual event. Apologies, we're having some technical difficulties, but I think we're online and we're ready to get this started with you guys. I wanted to introduce myself first before we get into some information about Women of MENA in Tech. My name is Sharzad, and I am part of the Women of MENA in Tech LA team. Please go on our website, womenofmena'intechnology.com, to learn more about what we do and the work that we do in LA and in 17 other chapters. Including LA and Europe and all over US and also Canada. We're very excited for the conversation we're having today because, as we know, the job market and the landscape has been changing a lot in the past couple of months as we're all trying to navigate COVID, either working on our personal goals and trying to elevate ourselves, or we're trying to look for a new job. Therefore, the team and I thought that we wanted to come up with something that will resonate with everybody and hopefully everybody will learn a lot from. If any of you want to be involved as part of our city teams, please do email us at la@womenofmena'intechnology.com, and my colleague will be actually sharing all these on the chat so you have easy access to those. If you want to support us and get involved in different ways, you can also email us at partnership@womenofmena'intechnology.com or events@womenofmena'intechnology.com. You can, we have a lot of resources such as mentorship and connecting you guys with the local events. And now we know that everything has gone virtual, but we have a lot of great events all across the US and Europe that you can all log in, given that it's virtual. So we're very excited to be connecting you with a larger network of professionals. A little bit of information about us. Women of MENA in Technology is a 5 years young organization. We're focused on elevating, celebrating, and mentoring women of Middle East and North Africa in technology. Many of you that have been with us for a long time might recognize us as Persian Women in Technology. And Persian Women in Tech started back in 2015, established by Sepide Nasiri, who is the founder and CEO. And starting April of this year, we actually decided to expand our reach and make sure that also all the women that are from Middle East and North Africa can also have access to the resources and the community that we have built over the past 5 years. So we're very excited that now we can increase our chapter and resources to many more cities around the world. We're also excited to announce that we have our annual conference that has gone virtual now. We have a lot of information regarding a conference on our website, so please do check it out. We have really great programs during our conference, including mentorship sessions. We have virtual career fair. We have demo booth, and we will be using the same platform that we're using now, Hopin. So you will have an opportunity to go into different sessions and engage and interact with a lot of professionals around the world. If you would like to support us, or if you would like to learn more about our conference, please email us at conference@womenofmena'intechnology.com. Without further ado, I'm excited to invite our panelist and our moderator for our panel on how to be more competitive in the tech job market. We'll have a little bit of delay as I'm transitioning our panelists into the stage, so bear with me. Thanks again for joining. I know you guys will have a lot of questions during the event and during the panel, so please share your questions and comments on the chat. Mariam from the LA team will be gathering all of your questions, and then we'll be communicating those to Jen, our moderator, so then we can get to those questions at the end of the panel. At 7:10 p.m., we're going to go back to our networking session rooms, so to ensure that you guys will get a chance again to connect with our panelists and ask any questions that you have one-on-one. Thank you so much for joining us again. We're really excited to have this conversation, and I will go ahead and bring our panelists and moderator into the call.
All right. Thank you so much, Shahrzad. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself, and then as the other panelists join, we'll have them introduce themselves as well. So I'm Jen. I actually work with Shahrzad at Nexleaf Analytics, and our organization is a tech nonprofit, and we go in middle-income countries on bringing data and leading edge technology to the forefront of climate and public health interventions. So it's really incredible work. Prior to Nexleaf, I spent a lot of time leading different HR functions at both tech and non-tech companies. And something that I've come to realize is hiring is, if not one of the most important role I can play in HR and really setting a company up for success. So I'm just especially excited about this topic. It means a lot to me. It's how I got my foot in the door through HR. And I'm really excited to learn with you from our panelists and get insights so you can bring your best self to the table as you look for new opportunities. So with that, Mariam and Cameron, are you on with us yet? Shahrzad, do you know if Cameron and Mariam are on with us?
Sorry, Jen. Yes, it looks like they got kicked off somehow, so they're trying to be back on. So
okay.
Yes, I think in a minute they'll be back on. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. So as they're joining, Shahrzad touched on this, but we've come up with some questions and topics that we think are really important for us to discuss in this really, really uncertain climate. So as you listen to the panelists, if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We'd love to get to your questions and make sure this is as beneficial to you as possible. Hey, Cameron.
Hello. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Cameron Khani. I'm the manager of talent acquisition for Signal Sciences, the fastest growing web application security company in the world. I'm definitely really excited to join all of you this evening to share a little bit more about how to make yourself competitive in this difficult tech job market. But yeah, excited to share some insights and learn more about everyone.
Great. Thanks, Cameron. Mariam?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Great.
Okay. My name is Mariam Barnes. I'm super excited to be here tonight, and I appreciate all of you taking time out to be here as well. I'm the lead acquisition talent partner at ServiceTitan, which is one of the fastest growing tech companies in LA right now. We're hiring anywhere between 30 and 50 people a month. There was a slight pause from COVID, but we're back on track. And it's the leading software for the trades. So it's an interesting beast of its own. But I'm really excited to share with you all some tips and tricks and things that I've learned throughout the process of hiring, the art of matchmaking, I say. And that's all.
Awesome. So Cameron, I heard from you, it's a tough market. Mariam, it sounds like your company is growing like gangbusters. And I think an appropriate topic to start with that I'm personally wondering about is, on the news, you see both small and large tech companies that are downsizing or pausing hiring. And then you also have some people saying we're already in a recession and unemployment doesn't look so good. So I would love both of your perspectives on this. What is the job market like? Is it no longer a candidate's market? And is this a good time for someone to be looking?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it's definitely no longer a candidate-driven market where rising salaries and signing bonuses are routine. It's now an employer-driven market where candidates get what they get because of supply and demand. So there's so much talent on the market right now that there's backup candidates for backup candidates. So my best advice for candidates right now is to recognize the game has shifted and changed a little bit and not to push for too much or risk that the company might just move on to the next candidate.
Yeah, I completely agree with that that sentiment. But in addition to that, I also think it's really important to be strategic in your search right now and pay attention to the companies that are booming. If you think about platforms that are actually capitalizing on this opportunity, like Hopin, for example, I would imagine Hopin is getting more use than it ever did before. A company like Zoom, for example, or even ServiceTitan, the company that I'm with, our customers are, plumbing companies and HVAC and electrical, where they're essential. And so it's a need to have software, not a nice to have. And so with that, if you're strategic in your job search, the companies that are going to excel in this time, those are the companies I would be targeting first. But to Cameron's point, it is not once the candidates market it used to be. And so you need to temper your expectations for sure.
Yeah, that's really important to know, Mariam. I know from time to time I'll read what McKinsey or another consulting organization has to say about COVID, and they'll highlight companies that are really set up to lead us into the future and navigate this change versus companies that might most be impacted by this. So I love that about being strategic. So one thing I've also seen pop up a lot right now are websites like, I think it's layoff.fyi and Candor. Those companies are compiling lists of organizations that are still hiring, organizations that are letting go, and part of that entails inviting candidates to put their profiles on there. What are your thoughts on that? If you were on the market, would you put your profile up?
That's a great question. Well, I'd say it never hurts to put yourself on one of those lists. You're most likely going to get inundated with messages and calls, most of which aren't likely relevant. So if you're dealing with, if you're okay with dealing with a high volume of messages, this type of strategy could definitely pan out. There's some really amazing talent out there that's available right now that would have never been available under other circumstances. Think about, Uber, Lyft, Bird, all these companies that had to do layoffs. There's such talent out there. It's just a matter of being able to capitalize on that, but also making sure that you're not getting tired from all these interviews, because there is such a thing about interview fatigue, but also it's making sure that you do enough interviews and get enough practice so that once you have that dream role, that you can go in and knock it out of the park.
It's really interesting because there's just a lot of new things to consider in this landscape. And I know from my organization that we've had to completely overhaul our interview process. So what used to be final round interviews in the office where we could really delight with the candidate experience are now remote, on-site, or as remote final rounds as possible. And Mariam, I think based on our conversation, it sounds like you've been doing remote interviews for a while. What tips do you have for candidates on do's and don'ts for remote interviewing?
Oh, I love this one because before COVID, I would always tell people, I would always coach my candidates when they have a phone call, a phone interview, to have notes in front of themselves with a kind of like a refresher of how great they are. Because sometimes on an interview, you'll be on the phone and you'll forget, oh yeah, I was the best achiever last quarter. Oh yeah, I did do X amount, last quarter. And you don't remember to highlight those things unless you have them in front of you. And so now that on-sites are actually being virtual, you can have that cheat sheet in front of you of the highlights of your career, the big wins that you've had recently, some things that you don't want to forget to say. So if anything, it's an opportunity to kind of get all your ducks in a row and be able to have a less intimidating environment if you can remember to reference your notes and do that in a way that's not too obvious.
Yeah, as we have already experienced on this call, technical glitches come up, and obviously we're doing the best we all can in our living situations. And so something I wanted to touch on is when we started doing remote interviewing, we found that some candidates used a white background, and some candidates interviewed in front of their closet with their closet door open. How important is it to have a professional presence when you're doing a remote interview?
It's really everything. With all the interviews going virtual for the foreseeable future, it's important to be prepared. So I recommend having the right setup at home by establishing a professional setting. Make sure you're optimizing your lighting. Check your internet connection by running a speed test if you haven't done so recently. About a month ago, I actually added speed to our home internet because it was lagging with all of our devices and 2 people working from home. And you can also do a test run where you do a Zoom with a friend, even a Zoom interview. Last but not least, make sure to dress correctly. But, I love the fact that Mariam, pointed out the fact that you should be able to, get all of your ducks in a row, get some notes together that really can help to, kind of showcase, what you've been doing. Maybe you have a brag book lying around somewhere that you can dust off and kind of, explain exactly, where you came from and what you're looking for.
Yeah. The other thing is, I think when it comes to this type of environment, it's not really about, like, I think we're all human. So if a kid walks by, or if your wife or husband is handing you a coffee, I mean, we're all human and we're all working from home, and so those circumstances are understandable. But if it's sloppy, if you look like you've had zero effort, or you're not putting the importance on an interview, that's its own message.
So just continuing with the theme of this new way of interviewing and networking, I know the women and men of MENA have really had to shift how they network and meet with people. And in many ways, it's opened up even more possibilities. Something I've noticed as a recruiter is I'm getting way more messages directly from applicants, reaching out directly to me, pitching their candidacy. What do you both think of that? Yay, nay, any etiquette around that?
Cameron, or do you want me to go?
Yeah, you take this.
So the question is, you're getting way more applicants than usual, yes?
Applicants who are reaching out directly with a direct message on LinkedIn or other forms.
Yes, definitely. Like, there's definitely an influx of that. So are you asking if that's like the proper way to do it, or what's the? I just want to make sure I understand the question, so I'm answering it properly.
I think, like, one thing I'm curious about from your perspective as a recruiter, and I know candidates have even reached out directly to CEOs. Would you recommend that? And is there any way a candidate could go wrong doing that?
So I do think, there's definitely, you want to be proactive, but there are definitely boundaries where it seems, you don't want to cross the boundaries. So one thing that I've seen is somebody who applies on the website will email everybody on our talent team, will reach out to the hiring managers, and that becomes excessive and frankly not necessary. If you're just from a recruiting standpoint, I'm looking for a fit for my job. I want somebody to fit my role. So if you are a fit and I see that you're a fit, I will make sure that you are in our building at some point, or our Zoom building. But that is our goal too. So our goal isn't to brush everybody off and you need to do everything to stand out in front of me. If you're genuinely a fit, I will make sure that if you've applied to the role, I will respond to you. If you're not getting a response or you're getting a rejection, it is probably not going to get you the job anymore by reaching out to several colleagues. So it's just something to keep in mind. I will say though, if you do have one direct contact, it doesn't hurt to put your name out in front of them. It doesn't hurt to get a little extra exposure. And that's never really frowned upon. It's just when reaching out to the masses, then it just becomes, a little lack of self-awareness and maybe crossing too many boundaries.
Yeah, thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. Cameron, I'm really curious about your perspective on this with everything going on in the world, not just COVID, but with recent events in our own country, spotlighting racial inequity and injustice. Companies who have always done the right thing and put attention on diversity, equity are doubling down on that. And companies who might have been a little behind are really awakening right now and focusing on that, starting with recruiting. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what should candidates know about this shift?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, with last year's Me Too movement, in the midst of all of these, protests and demonstrations and murders, the talk and degree of the candor around gender and racial issues has never been greater. So this is a great opportunity for you as a candidate to find a company that aligns with your values. When given the opportunity to ask questions and ask more than just the bottom line or product specs, you want to know your company is standing for something more So ask those difficult questions that weren't on the table before. It's not improper to ask. Recruiters must be able to address these with candidates. So now we're in a different atmosphere professionally and personally, and these intertwine more so than ever. So don't be afraid to bring more of yourself to an interview than you have in the past. You need to find companies that are going to support you and who you are. So again, don't be afraid to ask what the company is doing to ensure pay equity, career progression, and representation at the leadership level.
Yeah, with that, it sounds like in the past where candidates might have been holding back on bringing their full self to the table, now is the time to really embrace your authentic self, even if it detracts certain companies, because those might not be the companies that have that strong culture or values match.
Totally.
So
our diversity and inclusion, actually, we had a conversation about this recently, and she said candidates should recognize that right now, consider themselves a stock or a commodity, and their stock is really high. It's very valuable right now to have a diverse background, and companies are clamoring for diversity. So if there's any way to showcase that you can bring diversity to the table, companies, especially ones that are in growth mode, are really looking to have more diversity at the table. So it's a great time to highlight those differences.
Great. Mariam, I know you started a recruiting firm and you've done a lot of recruiting in your time. Stats I've seen, and I would say reflect my personal experience, is most candidates get rejected at the application stage. What tips do you have for someone to stand out starting with their resume?
So I think there's a lot, in my opinion, and part of it is that people are applying for jobs that are not necessarily a fit is one thing. It's more, I think, pay closer attention to the job description and the very key elements of why you believe it's a fit and apply accordingly. So one of the components is I'll get, for example, somebody who's applied for, I can see 17 jobs at our company. And to me, I think Cameron actually said this example of it's better to be an expert in one field than a jack of all trades. Because when I look at that to me is immediate. You're not a fit for this role, because I need somebody who's an expert in this role. And so one of the things you can do to stand out is if you truly identify yourself as a fit for this role. For example, if you've been ruled out and you feel like that's unjust, I genuinely felt like I'm a fit, then that would be a case where you can reach out to the recruiter directly on LinkedIn. But even more so, I would say customize your resume to reflect that you're an expert in that role. As a recruiter, I can only dissect what I can read. And if you genuinely feel you're a fit and I might have missed that, then it's important to recognize why I might have missed that. It could be that some of the key things I'm looking for that I've identified, you did not identify in your profile. And depending on the role, I know our tech recruiters, what they have said is that what would help stand out on, for example, on the engineering side or product side, what people are doing more now are having profiles having profiles or websites that showcase more than just what their resume can showcase. So, and I think Cameron could probably speak better about this than I can, but for example, like having a GitHub and extracurricular projects that are outside of the scope of your job, those are all things that showcase more than what your resume might be able to showcase, and then LinkedIn is also something. A lot of the times I'm looking at a resume that's too wordy. And sometimes LinkedIn is just easier to dissect. It shows exactly how long you've been there. It shows what this company is, and I can click on it and see what it is. So if you pay attention to how much content you have on your resume, I would say a really good tool is to look at your LinkedIn, which filters out a lot of that fluff. And that's what recruiters are looking for. So a lot of just the basics. Another tip for that would be where you have your title of your company. A lot of times, unless you're working at, let's say a Netflix or a Zoom or a company that we're all familiar with, a lot of the times I don't know what that company is. So I don't know that maybe it's a leading cloud company and I'll have no idea. So a little one sentence underneath each company and what that company does will really help me determine, what that company does, how it's relevant or not, what industry it's in. And those are a lot of the things that save us from having to figure out if you're a fit.
Totally. Yeah, I couldn't say better myself. And just to kind of piggyback off of that, While there's been less of an emphasis, at a lot of tech companies, including Netflix and others, it's still a representation of you, and you have about 5 to 10 seconds to make a good first impression. If you have years and no months, that's a red flag. If you have a 10-page resume, which I saw a couple weeks ago, you're not concise in the way you communicate. So a picture is sometimes a risky thing to put on your resume. Leave that content for LinkedIn. Reach out to the recruiter, but maybe wait a week, as Mariam was talking about earlier. So we got your resume. We'll be in touch once we review it. And we're getting so many resumes now, more so than ever. So please be patient with the recruiting teams, especially the 1 or 2 person teams. So, definitely leverage your network as well. So, if you do know someone at the company, that's your in. They can refer you. And companies, again, as I mentioned, are getting more applications more so than ever. So especially on sales and marketing roles. Because those are some areas that people were laid off in recent months. So with a resume, less is more in terms of formatting and style. Keep a basic format, but don't go wild with any fonts and colors.
Mm-hmm. And I think we only have time for a few more questions, so I'm going to ask a few quick ones. In fact, the next one I'm just going to ask our thumbs up or thumbs down. Cover letters.
I like it though. I'm cool with cover letters. It's it's more information.
Sounds like there's a difference there. Mariam, where can you go wrong with a cover letter?
Sorry. It's not that a cover letter is wrong. I just know that in a lot of cases, I don't think people read them. I think they go in unnoticed. And I realize, people put a lot of time and effort into a cover letter. So I just say, you can spend your time doing something else. In a lot of cases, they don't get read. Cameron, do you disagree? Tell me. I'd love
totally
to.
Agree. And there's once in a blue moon, I'll read a cover letter and I'm like, okay, this explains a lot of the stuff that maybe I didn't see on the resume. So sometimes it's like, like I cared for a family member from this year to this year. I didn't have it on my resume, just filling in the gaps. And I just moved from, Albuquerque to Los Angeles, looking for opportunities. My last few jobs were all in Albuquerque, but just want, so anytime they can, maybe even have something where they, sent a message to Mariam or myself and they're like, they get it. They see that we posted the role, or maybe they, put my name and the hiring manager's name. Like they've done more research beyond just applying to the role. That's always good to see. But again, that's why I kind of went like this. I'm okay with cover letters, but it's just like more information if I need it. But I'm not going to look at it first. I'm actually going to look at the resume first and then maybe the cover letter, but most likely not, as Mariam was saying. So I agree with her on a lot of that stuff.
Mariam,
I also think to just go, but I think this is important too. With resumes, a good rule of thumb is, and you can tell me if you disagree, Cameron, but what I think is a good rule of thumb is 1 page for every 10 years of experience, maximum 2 pages, right? And then when you get to the point where when you're even considering a 3rd page, then you have too much information on there. And so that's something, I always say there are ways to minimize that. For example, if you have something on there from 30 years ago, let's say, the only thing in tech that would be important 30 years ago is if you had a felony on your record. But otherwise, like nothing you did 30 years ago in tech would be super relevant. So there's ways to condense, what you've done anything over 20 years ago. There's ways to condense your first job doesn't need to be on there necessarily if it was, waiting on tables. But then to the point of what Cameron said with having a cover letter, if you do have important information you need to share, like I've been taking care of a family member, there are little tricks to putting those within the resume so you can still tell your story without needing a whole separate sheet of paper. That's all. But more information doesn't hurt. Just saying that sometimes if you have something important to say, it can be in there.
This was much more of a riveting topic than I thought it would be, but I wanted to build on something you said, Mariam, earlier, which actually gave me pause. You said fit a lot. And what I know about, and I don't think you intended this, but what I know about the landscape and how everything has with the world has really been a catalyst for change in a good way for recruiting. And part of that change, I think, has compelled companies to look at fit differently, look at how they define top talent differently, and to think about, I know both of you are at really quickly growing startups that are also recognized as best places to work. And I think a lot of companies are looking for the fuller package. And I want to hear from both of you. Beyond technical skills, what are the things that are really important to your organization and your culture?
Yeah, great question. So, beyond technical skills, I think there's just a few things like attributes like empathy, creativity, kindness, collaboration, adaptability is a big one, fortitude, being open-minded, optimistic, sense of humor. I could keep going on, but basically people want to know if they, drop you into a job that you're not going to panic. And I think the more of these kinds of attributes that you have, and just being positive is an attribute. You don't want to hire someone who's super negative. So I think, some of those attributes are huge beyond your, typical, I know JavaScript or I know, Golang or React.
And I'm heavy on chemistry within a team. So I agree with everything Cameron said. Just to add to that, though, that I think that when I recruit, I think most great recruiters actually use that. They get to know their hiring manager, and then they get to know their candidate, and it is very much the art of matchmaking. So there are times when I, for example, I think I'm a great recruiter, but there are times when I was at a company which was also a great company, and it wasn't a fit, and that was because the team that I was on, it just didn't feel comfortable. I felt like the company culture wasn't a match for me. I'm sure they came, and that happens. That doesn't mean I'm a crappy recruiter or it was not a great company. It just means it wasn't a fit. So when I place people, I do look very much at the team makeup and somebody who would fit in with what's important to that those hiring managers. For example, I have one hiring manager who really loves to mentor people, and so I know when I talk to people, they don't need to necessarily have all of the skills that the job requires. They just need to want to learn. And when I pick up on that, I'll match make accordingly. And then I have another hiring manager who doesn't have time for that. He doesn't want to teach anybody. He needs somebody who's going to come in and be autonomous. And neither of them are right or wrong. It's about finding a fit, right? So finding somebody that will work on that team that has those skills and can be very autonomous and comfortable. So it's far more than just the skills on paper. It's very much the chemistry between hiring manager and potential candidate.
Yeah, and just one quick thing. So I know fit is a word that sometimes can be misconstrued, and I think sometimes a better way to just spin it is maybe like culture add or match. And I think you've been saying match, matchmaking. That's exactly what we're doing on a daily basis. And so the more we can spin it a little bit to just make it like more of an addition to the team. Like, hey, we have lack of this skill or this attribute, they're adding this to the team, or they're a match for the team because of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know employers are looking at it in way more dimensions now than they were before, way beyond your typical D&I categories, looking at introversion and extroversion and different collaborative approaches. So it's really helpful. So, one thing I hear a lot from candidates who interview is, hey, I'm trying to be a more competitive candidate, but when I interview, sometimes I walk away from an interview and I think I did an incredible job and I don't get the job, but I also don't get feedback. Do you guys share feedback? And what can a candidate do to ask for a feedback in a way that'll help them with their future interview?
So we have a very feedback heavy environment internally. Internally, we're very focused on like making sure everybody's growing and improving. And so being receptive to feedback is important to us internally, but externally is a very tricky thing to navigate. So I would not typically offer feedback to a candidate unless they went out of their way to ask me. And then typically I would try to carve out time on the phone to walk them through like what could be better. But I also have to caveat that with, in a lot of cases, and I would say probably more often than not, it comes from being, there might be a lack of a specific skill, or it could just be, that there was somebody who might have been slightly stronger, but not that this person was missing anything. So a lot of the times it's not always there's a big negative or something you could be doing better. It's just that there might just be somebody who is a better fit from the skill set or whatever it is they're looking for. So bottom line is, I would offer feedback when asked, only when asked, and typically over the phone to make it for context.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. Internally, yeah, of course, feedback is super important, and we do a really good job of that. Externally, totally different ball game. And again, it depends on where they're at in the process. If it's at the application stage, early stage, they do get an email with no specific feedback, letting them know, the hiring managers decided to move forward with other candidates at this time. Of course, you never want to ghost someone who took the time to apply to your company. If someone has invested several hours, of course, as Mariam said, pick up the phone, have a conversation with them. Even if they aren't getting the best news, even if they're, a silver medalist or a bronze medalist, the closure that you get is greatly appreciated and can really help you for future interviews.
Great. I'm going to ask one last question as part of the formal part of the panel, and it looks like we do have a question or two trickling in. So I thought of this because long before I was a recruiter, I spent many years as a candidate learning the hard way how to interview more effectively, still on that learning journey. And I'm just wondering, now that you've been a recruiter, how has that helped you become a more effective candidate? What are some secret sauce tricks you can offer candidates?
I think for me, having been a candidate, I realized when I was, as you know, I worked for myself for a really long time. So when I was newly a candidate, it was very difficult. Actually, I wasn't even able to take my own advice. But one of the things I learned was that, like Cameron said early on, some of those interviews of jobs you might not even necessarily be interested in are very important to improve your skills. So I didn't turn down an interview until I was able to afford to be able to, until I had so many that I could be picky. But I took those opportunities to learn, to be better, to get more brushed up on the way I'd answer questions. And that was actually, I don't think anybody nails their first interview. And it's important to know that. It's important to know that you're probably not going to do amazing at your first interview. It doesn't always work like that. But the other thing is that I have learned to ask the recruiter for coaching. As a recruiter myself, I want my candidates to do well. If I'm going to showcase my candidates to a hiring manager, I don't want them to fail. I don't want them to have trick questions. I don't want them to flub up, especially if I genuinely believe that they would be a great match for the role. So it never hurts to follow up with your recruiter and ask for very specific questions. Like, can you tell me a little bit more about the person I'm speaking with? Can you tell me, what they're looking for? And that's not feeding you the answers. That's just helping you navigate the information and not be on a scavenger hunt. So I would say take advantage. If you have a recruiter willing to give you those tips, take advantage of it and ask for as much information as they're willing to give.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, ask for the next step, ask for the next interview, ask for the job at the end. A lot of people forget to ask for that because they assume, okay, well, if I do a good job, I'll get the job after the interview. But if you ask for the job on the spot, especially in a sales role, if you ask for that job and you do a great job all the way through up until that point, that interviewer may just offer you the job on the spot. And so then you have all the power in the whole negotiation. And I see, there may be a question about negotiations down the line. But I think that's a huge point where, as a recruiter, we know sometimes we can navigate these things a little bit better. But sometimes you just have to ask.
Yeah, I'm hearing from this conversation that we are all human, including the people on the other side. The recruiters, they know what it's like to be in your shoes. And so find that space to connect with the people you're interviewing with, to find that chemistry and see if it's for you. And if you like an organization, don't be shy about expressing that and showing that you're really interested in the role. So I'd like to actually shift gears, Shahrzad, I hope this is okay, to some of the questions that we're seeing here. This one is interesting, and I think I might add to it. So Valerie has a question. Do you review every resume you receive? So if you get 100 resumes, do you review them all or just until you have a solid pipeline? I'm going to throw in there, does a computer do the first pass?
So I typically review every resume. The only time I don't is if we've gotten to final stages with somebody. If we've extended an offer, there's just no sense in entertaining anybody new. Even if I find, the most amazing gem rock star, we're at offer phase. I couldn't entertain it if I wanted to. So at that point, I stopped reviewing, and they would just sit there until there's a final decision. If we lose the offer, then I start picking up again and going through those resumes. But for the most part, we do go through every single resume.
Yeah, I'm the same exact way. You never know. You got to go through every single resume. Don't leave no stone unturned, because that last person who just applied, that may be your rock star candidate that you were expecting or hoping to expect.
Yeah, and Valerie, just so you know, I was in a situation not too long ago where I thought we were closing in on a top candidate, but I kept looking at the resumes and I found a gem and we ended up going with them. I know that Cameron, Mariam, and I are all part of relatively smaller organizations, so this might not be the case for your 100,000 person company. At that stage, they get inundated with applications, but it's nice to know that many organizations still pay attention to each resume. So the next question we have is, back to what you said earlier, Cameron. You said this isn't really a time to be asking for too much. Nikta is, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, assuming that you were speaking about negotiations on an offer. Were you speaking about negotiations, and can you speak more on how to navigate that in this kind of market and what is appropriate?
Yeah, that's such a great question. That is the $1 million question. So yeah, this is a conversation that you have from that first conversation with a recruiter, and it's understood. So, you make sure, of course, the recruiter is not going to ask you what you're currently being paid, but they're going to want to know, where do you want to be in your next opportunity? And, based off of that, they may give you a range. They may say, they may offer up what they've been making where they want to be. So, once you get that sort of information, you keep it. And as a recruiter, and okay, that's within range. Cool. They may even ask you, hey, what's the range? And you do tell them what the range is. And at that point, you kind of have a ballpark about where that offer is going to be. And then, as you get towards the latter parts of the interview process, maybe before you give them the prep on their on-site interview, you start talking about, hey, so we've been discussing comp. We're getting close to the offer stage. If this goes well, you start saying, when do you expect to, potentially, start if you are to get this opportunity? So you start the wheel turning in their head. So by the time they get the offer, it's not a surprise. It's understood, because you've been talking about it all the way through and you've already negotiated it. So there's no negotiations on the back end of the process. You've already gone through that, more so on the front end, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say that in my opinion, it never hurts to share your actual desired compensation with a recruiter. It only helps. If you think about it, if you're working with an external recruiter that doesn't work in a company, more often than not, they're making their money based on how high they can get your salary. So even if you told them a low number, they're still going to try to get you the best number. And then internally, my responsibility is similar in the sense of, I want it to be a win-win. So I need to know your bottom lines, and I'm fighting for you. But I'm also fighting for you to get the job. I'm fighting for you to get a salary that you're happy with, because I don't want anybody to work at my company and have to take a huge pay cut and be miserable. So you should look at your recruiter as a trusted advisor in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And I'll weigh in here, because this is the first time I've been a part of a smaller tech company and a nonprofit, and so there's a reality for us and, for many other larger organizations right now, that we have to be a little more fiscally responsible through this uncertainty. And I have some candidates who let us know upfront what their salary or compensation range is. And sometimes it's pretty outside our ballpark. But if you're a top candidate, I'll check in with you and just say, hey, I know this is your expectation. I wanted to let you know where we are. So a lot of organizations are willing to have that transparent conversation up front right now. But I think it's still an opportunity for you to put what your needs are out there.
I try to be transparent on every call, because I don't want anybody investing in our process not knowing if it's worth their time. I also think in some cases, if they believe it might not be worth their time, they're not putting their best foot forward.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So we have one more question. Looks like our last part of our Q&A from Shannon, who I know recently graduated from her computer science program and is in a career transition. What advice do you have for new grads, since they're relatively new to the field and have minimum experience?
Yeah, so I would say definitely seek out a mentor. That's your best way to figure out, okay, I want this job that my mentor is in or maybe was in, and they probably know what sort of talent gaps you might have that you need to work on, or maybe be able to even refer you into a company, even their own. So the more you can kind of get advice from someone who's been there, done that, maybe a year or two older, or, maybe a level or two higher than you are, I think will absolutely set you up for success, because then you hear everything. You hear the good stuff, you hear, maybe the not so pretty stuff, but you at least understand what you're getting yourself into. And yeah, it's not going to be all butterflies. It's not going to be all easy. It is going to be a challenge. So you need to be able to mitigate that risk and make it an easier situation for yourself. So the more conversations you have, the better. And, even recruiters like Mariam and myself, Jennifer, we love helping people. We love giving people advice. Even if I don't have a job for you, I will sit down with you and talk to you. Really, if you want to talk a recruiting opportunity, you want to talk any sort of opportunity, that's what we're here for, especially now. People have time. They're home. We're not going anywhere. We'll be here Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So we are happy to help any way we can.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo that. We're here for you. Mariam, are you still with us?
Yep.
Okay, great. Anything to add on that?
I think mentorship, just like Cameron said, but also internships where possible. I also think it is about tempering your expectations. Really, when you're a new graduate and you have no work experience to offer, the opportunity to be picky is just not really in your favor. And so it's not the popular opinion, because I know you're groomed to be picky and but the reality is to start somewhere. Everybody does. And so you might not get the compensation you thought you would get right out of the gates. It might not be your dream job right out of the gates, but genuinely it's all of those roles that amount to, just a few years in, you do have your dream job and you are getting that great compensation and all of those things. So it's just a matter of tempering your expectations. But these events, like these networking events, now that you can be remote, you should be at as many as you can. You're not sitting in LA traffic to be at a meeting at a bar at 7 o'clock at night, paying for parking. You get to be a part of you could be a part of these Zoom meetings 5 nights a week, networking with as many people as you can.
No excuses, totally.
No excuses. I love that. So Shahrzad, before we switch into our networking session, I just wanted to add one thing, Shannon. We generally do not hire early career engineers at Nexleaf, but when we have, what's distinguished one early career engineer from another is one who demonstrates both in their resume and on their stories that they are just passionate about what they do. So they've either gotten the internships, or they have a portfolio they've built, or they've helped their neighbor build an app for something. And we can see them and their work in action, and they're just someone who really likes to tinker. So being able to bring that alive is really important.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for such a great, engaging discussion. And thank you for everybody who was engaged on the chat and asked questions. And for those of you that have a lot of thoughts and thinking about your questions, you still have a chance to get one-on-one with our great panelist and our moderator. So at this time, we're going to close the panel. And then what you can do is on the left side on where you see session, you can click on the sessions and hop in and out of different rooms as well. So if you have different questions for Mariam, for Cameron, for Jen, or if you also just want to network with the attendees, there are different rooms where you can go and do that. So much, Jen, Cameron, Mariam, for your insightful contribution and for helping your community navigate this time, but also to elevate themselves and advance their career.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
An honor.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, well, have a good night, everybody, and we'll see you in the networking sessions.